soft piano fades in, the kind that feels like a hug from an old friend. I'm sitting here in my little office, the one with the creaky wooden desk, the stack of worn medical journals, and that chalkboard behind me that simply says, Hope Heals. I'm Dr. Hope, 86 years young, and I've been walking alongside patients for almost 50 years now, over 30,000 visits, if anyone's counting. Most days I still see folks just like you, worried about the same quiet fear that keeps them up at night. Every 3 seconds, another senior somewhere in this country hears the word dementia. That's 400 new diagnoses by the time we finish talking today. 400 families holding their breath, wondering if this is the beginning of the end. And the hardest part, almost every one of them thinks it's just getting old. I thought that once, too, until I watched too many brilliant minds dim for reasons that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with something we can actually fix. Let me tell you about Margaret. She was 78, a retired third-grade teacher who could still recite the Gettysburg Address from memory. Crossword puzzles were her love language. She finished the Sunday Times in ink. Then one Tuesday morning, she called her daughter in a panic because she couldn't remember her grandson's name. A week later, she forgot her own wedding anniversary. And the day that broke my heart. She wandered home from the neighborhood park she'd walked every afternoon for 30 years, tears streaming, convinced she was losing her mind. Her daughter brought her to me clutching a grocery list she'd stared at for 20 minutes without recognizing a single word. Margaret sat right where you're picturing me now, hands trembling in her lap, whispering, Dr. Hope, is this it? Is this how it ends? I took her hand and told her the truth. I've learned after 5 decades in this chair, dementia isn't a verdict. It's inflammation quietly starving the brain, one neuron at a time. And the $355 billion drug industry would rather sell lifelong pills than admit something as simple as the food on our plates can turn the tide. Harvard researchers just showed that one everyday snack can improve memory recall by 37% in 6 weeks. Another food something most kitchens don't even stock can coax the brain to grow brand new cells, like rolling the clock back to 40. I've watched it happen. Margaret's story doesn't end in tears. It ends with her beating me at Scrabble last month, crowing about a 7-letter word on a triple score. So here's what we're doing today. I'm laying out 8 ordinary foods ranked from powerful to downright miraculous that cool brain inflammation, rebuild connections, and hand you back the sharp mind you thought was slipping away. We'll start with something you've probably been told to avoid your whole life, and we'll finish with the one food that slashes dementia risk nearly in half. All of it backed by the studies I've pored over at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come because I couldn't stop thinking about patients like Margaret. Before we dive in, do me a favor, drop your age and where you're watching from in the comments. Tell me if you've noticed names slipping or keys vanishing more than they used to. I read every single one, and I answer with tips tailored just for you. Now, let's start with a breakfast staple that's been unfairly villainized for decades. I want to start our countdown with something that's probably sitting in your refrigerator right now: eggs. Yes, those humble little ovals that have been scolded, praised, and scolded again over the years. I remember the day in 1984 when the American Heart Association put out a warning that sent half my patients scrambling to the trash with their egg cartons. I stood in my office kitchen watching a sweet widow named Gladys toss out a dozen perfectly good eggs, tears in her eyes because she thought she was protecting her heart. Fast forward 40 years, and Harvard wraps up a 15-year study on 25,000 people and quietly announces folks who ate eggs nearly every day had 39% less cognitive decline. Their brains tested 7 years younger than the folks who skipped them. Gladys would have been 92 this year. I wish I could tell her the yolk was never the enemy. Let's talk about why eggs deserve the number 8 spot on our brain-saving list and why they're still powerful enough to earn a place in your morning routine. Your brain is a chatty place, billions of neurons firing messages back and forth every second, and the chemical that keeps the conversation flowing is called acetylcholine. Think of it as the postal service for your memories. When acetylcholine runs low, the mail stops getting delivered, names disappear, appointments vanish, and that word on the tip of your tongue stays there forever. One large egg hands you 147 milligrams of choline, the raw material your body uses to manufacture acetylcholine. That's more than a quarter of what most of us need in a single day. But here's where eggs pull ahead of every supplement on the shelf. The choline comes wrapped in phospholipids, little fat bubbles that act like VIP, passes straight through the blood-brain barrier. Pills can't sneak past that gate. Eggs can. I want you to meet Harold. He rolled into my clinic on a Tuesday afternoon in his grease-stained overalls. 74 years, young and madder than a wet hen. "Doc," he said, slapping a spark plug socket on my desk. I stared at this thing for 10 minutes and couldn't remember what it was called. I rebuilt a '57 Chevy blindfolded in my day. Now I can't find the ketchup in my own fridge. Harold's hands still had the calluses of a lifetime mechanic, but his confidence was cracking. His wife had started hiding the car keys because he'd driven to the hardware store and forgotten why he was there. We ran the usual tests, nothing scary, just the slow creep of inflammation. I asked him what he ate for breakfast. Black coffee and yesterday's worries. He grumbled. We started simple. 3 soft-boiled eggs every morning, nestled on a bed of baby spinach and chopped red bell pepper. Nothing fancy. Nothing fried. Harold grumbled about the rabbit food, but he trusted me enough to try it for 30 days. 8 weeks later, he marched back in, eyes sparkling, carrying a Polaroid of the bicycle he'd just rebuilt for his grandson down to the custom paint job and the bell that played Take Me Out to the Ball Game. "Doc," he said. I even remembered where I hid the extra spokes from 1982. That's the quiet miracle of feeding your brain what it's begging for. Now, let's make sure you get the same results without turning your kitchen into a science lab. First, cook gently. Drop your eggs into already simmering water for 6 to 7 minutes if you like them soft. 8 if you want the yolk a little firmer. Frying at high heat oxidizes 20% of the precious choline before it ever reaches your bloodstream. Second, never ditch the yolk that Golden Center holds lutein and zeaxanthin, 2 antioxidants that shield your brain cells from the same oxidative stress that rusts a tailpipe. Third, invite some vitamin C to the party. Slice a bell pepper or have a few cherry tomatoes. The vitamin C escorts choline across the barrier 30% more efficiently. Finally, eat them early. Your brain uses that morning choline to produce acetylcholine that keeps you sharp straight through dinner. Harold still sends me a Christmas card every year. On the front is a picture of him and his grandson on that same bike, both grinning like they've got a secret. Inside he writes, "Still got all my tools labeled, and I remember every one." That's what happens when you stop fearing the yolk and start trusting the science. All right, my friend, put a little check mark next to eggs on your grocery list. But before we move on, I want you to imagine biting into something that lifts brain fog in under 2 hours and tastes like the dessert your grandmother used to hide in the cookie jar. That's waiting for us at number 7. Let's move to number 7. And I have to warn you, this one feels almost too good to be true. But I promise every word is rooted in the studies I've dog-eared in my office. Dark chocolate. Not the waxy milk chocolate bars you grab at the checkout line, but the real stuff, 70% cacao or higher. The kind that snaps when you break it and leaves a faint, bitter kiss on your tongue. I still remember the first time I read the Swiss study. Researchers handed 90 seniors either dark chocolate or white chocolate, then tested their recall 2 hours later. The dark chocolate group scored 23% higher, and their brain scans lit up like Christmas blood, surging straight to the hippocampus, the little seahorse-shaped vault where every birthday, every first kiss, every grandchild's laugh is filed away. The hero inside that square is a flavonoid called epicatechin. Picture it as a tiny construction crew. It tells your brain to sprout brand new blood vessels, widening the highways so oxygen and nutrients arrive faster. More traffic lanes equal sharper thinking. Columbia University took this a step further. They gave 60-year-olds a high flavonoid cocoa drink every day for 3 months. At the end, those 60-year-olds tested like 30-year-olds on memory tasks. 30 years peeled off with a mug of cocoa. I keep a framed copy of that abstract on my desk because every time a patient says, "Doc, nothing can help at my age," I point to it and smile. Evelyn walked into my clinic on a rainy Thursday, clutching a canvas library tote that had seen better decades. She was 82, a retired librarian who used to rattle off Dewey Decimal numbers in her sleep. Lately, she'd stand in the biography section staring at spines, unable to remember a single title. I shelved. "To Kill a Mockingbird. 1,000 times," she whispered, "and now I can't even find it on my own nightstand." Her daughter had started taping labels on the kitchen cabinet's coffee. Sugar, tea, because Evelyn kept opening the wrong doors. The fear in her eyes wasn't about forgetting books. It was about forgetting herself. We started small. 2 modest squares of 80% dark chocolate every afternoon at 3 o'clock, right when the post-lunch fog rolls in. I told her to let it melt slowly. No chewing, no milk, just the pure bar and a handful of almonds if she wanted crunch. 6 weeks later, Evelyn burst through my door. No appointment. No coat despite the drizzle waving a yellow legal pad. She'd written out the courthouse scene from Mockingbird, word for word, then recited it aloud while I sat there with goosebumps. "I haven't needed the cabinet labels in 2 weeks. She laughed. "Although I did eat the chocolate before breakfast once and couldn't sleep, lesson learned." Here's how to turn this indulgence into medicine without a single regret. First, check the label. 70% cacao is the minimum. 85 is better. 90 if you like the edge. Anything less is mostly sugar dressed up in brown, and sugar is the express lane to inflammation. Second, portion matters. 1 to 2 ounces a day, about 2 to 4 small squares. That's enough epicatechin to do its work without the caffeine keeping you up counting ceiling tiles. Third, timing is everything. Eat it between 2 and 4 in the afternoon when your brain naturally dips. The flavonoids ride that little energy boost like a surfer on a wave. Fourth, never pair it with milk. Dairy proteins latch onto the flavonoids and drag them out before they reach your brain, cutting absorption by half. Finally, store it right. Heat and light are flavonoid assassins, so keep the bar in a cool drawer or the fridge door, wrapped tight. I buy mine in small batches from a local chocolatier who stamps the roast date on the wrapper. Anything older than a year loses half its punch. Evelyn still mails me postcards from the library where she volunteers, now pictures of kids discovering books she once shelved. On the back, she always writes the same line. Still no labels on my cabinets. That's the quiet power of feeding your brain what it was built to run on. Put a little post-it on your fridge 70% or higher. 2 squares. 3 o'clock. You'll thank me when the afternoon fog lifts and the words you need slide right off your tongue. And speaking of what your brain is actually made of, 20% of it is a very special fat most of us aren't getting nearly enough of. Let's head to number 6 and talk about the fish that can literally grow your hippocampus while you sleep. Number 6 is the one that still makes me shake my head in wonder every time I pull a patient's follow-up scan fatty fish. We're talking wild salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring the oily, cold water swimmers that glisten on ice at the market. I know. Fish isn't everyone's favorite, but hear me out. Your brain is 60% fat by dry weight, and the star of that fatty cast is an omega-3 called DHA. It's the scaffolding that keeps your neurons flexible, the insulation that keeps messages zipping along, and the repair crew that patches holes while you dream. UCLA took 1,500 seniors, slid them into the MRI tube, and measured DHA levels in their blood. The folks on the low end had brains that looked 2 full years older shrunken, especially in the hippocampus, that little memory vault we keep leaning on. But when the same group started eating fatty fish just twice a week, their scans 6 months later showed actual growth, new gray matter, new volume, new hope, all from dinner. Tufts University tracked the numbers even longer. People with the highest DHA intake cut their dementia risk by 47%. That's nearly half the odds, earned with a fork, not a prescription bottle. I keep a laminated copy of that study taped inside my pantry door because every time I open it for canned sardines, I need the reminder that this isn't wishful thinking, it's biology. Frank was 77 when his daughter brought him in, both of them carrying the weight of a lifetime in their eyes. He'd served in Vietnam, came home with a chest full of medals and a head full of stories he used to tell at every family barbecue. Lately, the stories had holes. He'd start strong. We were pinned down outside Khe Sanh, then trail off, frowning at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. His granddaughter asked him once what Grandpa's best friend looked like, and Frank stared at the floor for a full minute before whispering, "I'm sorry, honey. I can't see his face anymore." That was the day his daughter called me in tears. We didn't start with pills or puzzles. We started with Tuesday and Friday dinners baked wild salmon one night, sardines mashed on whole grain toast the next. Nothing fancy, just a squeeze of lemon, a sprinkle of dill, 15 minutes in a 375-degree oven. Frank grumbled about the fishy smell, but his wife turned it into date night, candle on the table, old jazz on the radio. 3 months later, he walked in without his daughter, stood a little taller, and before I could ask how he was feeling, he launched into the story of the night his platoon stole a Jeep from the motor pool and drove it into a rice paddy to rescue a wounded buddy. Every name, every detail, every laugh line intact. His granddaughter was waiting in the lobby. He knelt down, cupped her face, and said, "Your great-uncle Tommy had red hair and freckles like yours." She hugged him so hard his knees creaked. Here's how to make fatty fish work for you without turning your kitchen into a trawler. First, choose wild every time. Farmed salmon is cheaper, but it's fed grain and crowded into pens, so it carries half the DHA and a load of pollutants you don't want hitchhiking to your brain. Look for labels that say wild-caught Alaskan or Pacific. Second, cook low and slow steam. Poach, or bake below 400 degrees. Frying turns those delicate omega-3s into useless sludge and adds trans fats that inflame everything they touch. Third, make it a dinner habit. Your brain does its heavy lifting while you sleep, using DHA to patch cell membranes and clear out the day's debris. A salmon fillet at 6 o'clock is like sending the night shift with the exact tools they need. Fourth, if the taste or the bones make you hesitate, a clean fish oil capsule works aim for 1,000 milligrams combined EPA and DHA, taken with a meal that has some fat so your body can absorb it. I tell patients to swallow it with a spoonful of peanut butter if they're squeamish. The fat coat doubles absorption. Frank still sends me a text every Friday, a photo of whatever fish is on the plate. Captioned, "Platoon roll call complete." Last week it was mackerel with roasted asparagus. And he added, "Tell the doc the hippocampus is holding the line. That's what happens when you give your brain the fat it was born to run on." Jot down wild salmon or sardines on your shopping list, and circle Tuesday and Friday on the calendar. Your future self will thank you at 3 in the morning when you wake up from a dream and remember every detail. And speaking of quiet warriors most folks overlook, number 5 is a humble legume that cools brain inflammation by 50% and costs pennies a serving. Let's talk beans. Number 5 might be the most overlooked hero on our entire list, and it costs less than a cup of coffee black beans. I'm talking about those glossy little crescents you rinse from a can or simmer from dry. The ones your grandmother probably called turtle beans and tucked into soups without ever guessing they were shielding her mind. Japanese researchers followed 1,000 seniors for 15 years, tracking every bite, the ones who ate beans daily, any kind. But black beans topped the charts, showed 40% less memory loss than the folks who skipped them. 40%. That's better than most of the brain-boosting bottles lining the pharmacy shelves. And it comes without a copay. The magic lives in 2 quiet compounds, folate and resistant starch. Folate is the builder. It helps your brain manufacture dopamine and serotonin, the chemicals that keep your mood steady and your recall quick. Run low, and the whole assembly line stalls. 1 cup of cooked black beans delivers 256 micrograms of folate, 60% of what most of us need in a day, and it releases it slowly, like a time-release capsule nature designed herself. Then there's the resistant starch, the part your small intestine waves past and your gut bacteria throw a party over. Those microbes churn out short-chain fatty acids that travel up the vagus nerve and tell your brain, "Cool the inflammation. We've got this." University of Illinois researchers measured it and eating beans 4 times a week had half the brain inflammation of once-a-month dabblers. Half. That's the difference between a brain on defense and a brain on vacation. Rosa was 79 when her daughter carried in a shoebox full of recipe cards, edges curled from decades of flour and love. Rosa had taught 3 generations to make her Oaxacan mole, the one with 23 ingredients and a story for each. Lately, she'd stand at the stove staring at the cinnamon stick like it was a foreign object. "I burned the chilies twice last week," she confessed, voice cracking. My granddaughter asked for the family recipe, and I couldn't remember if the chocolate went in before or after the sesame seeds. The shame in her eyes hurt worse than any diagnosis. We started gentle 1/2 cup of black beans 4 nights a week, folded into whatever she was already cooking. Mondays in chili, Wednesdays in rice, Fridays mashed with garlic and cumin for refried, Sundays in soup with a ham hock for old time's sake. I gave her 3 rules: no aluminum pots, a teaspoon of baking soda in the overnight soak, and a side of vitamin C. 10 weeks later, Rosa showed up with a covered pot and a grin wider than the Rio Grande. She lifted the lid mole, rich and dark, the air thick with ancho and clove. She ladled a bowl for me, then recited the ingredients in order without glancing at a card. Her granddaughter filmed it on her phone. The clip ends with Rosa winking at the camera and saying, "Tell Doctor, hope the cinnamon goes in last." Let me save you the trial and error. Rosa and I earned the hard way. Start with dry beans if you have the time. Cover them with 3 inches of water. Stir in a teaspoon of baking soda and let them soak overnight. The soda neutralizes lectins and breaks down the complex sugars that make some folks musical in all the wrong ways. In the morning, rinse well. Then simmer in fresh water with a thumb of ginger or a teaspoon of cumin. Both calm the belly and coax out flavor. Use stainless steel or enamel. Aluminum leaches into the beans and parks itself in brain tissue we'd rather keep clean. When they're tender, toss in chopped tomatoes or a squeeze of orange vitamin C rockets. Iron absorption 400%. And iron keeps oxygen flowing to every thought you'll ever have. If canned is your speed, choose low sodium, rinse thoroughly, and warm them with the same spices. Half a cup is plenty. More won't hurt. But your waistline might send a thank you note if you stop there. Rosa still texts me photos of her pot same dented one her mother used captioned, "Mole Monday." Last week she added, "Granddaughter says it's better than mine used to be. Don't tell her I finally measured the chocolate." Slip black beans onto your plate 4 times this week and feel the difference in your mood by Friday. Your brain will be cooler, your recall sharper, and your gut will thank you for the company. Write 1/2 cup, 4x on a sticky note and slap it on the fridge. And while you're there, grab a handful of something else that literally grows new gray matter 1 ounce a day, straight from nature's candy dish. Number 4 is waiting. Number 4 is the snack I keep in a mason jar on my desk, right next to the coffee filters. Because if I don't see it, I forget to eat it, and at 86, forgetting is the one thing I refuse to practice. Nuts. Not the sugary, salted cans from the gas station, but the plain, honest kind walnuts that look like tiny brains, almonds smooth as river stones, and the occasional Brazil nut that hides like a pearl in the mix. Loma Linda University spent 30 years shadowing 5,000 adults, weighing every handful. The ones who ate nuts at least 5 times a week arrived at 70 with 60% sharper cognitive scores than the folks who passed them by. Their brain scans told the rest of the story: more gray matter, thicker folds, literally more brain to work with. I've got a printout of one of those scans taped above my light switch every time I flip it on. I'm reminded that density isn't destiny. Walnuts led the pack because they're the only nut with a decent dose of plant-based omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid that your body converts into the same DHA we just talked about in fish. UCLA gave seniors 2 ounces of walnuts daily for 8 weeks. Memory tests jumped 19%, and the hippocampus lit up like a runway. Almonds bring vitamin E, a fat-soluble antioxidant that stands guard at the door of every neuron, turning away free radicals the way a bouncer turns away trouble. Johns Hopkins tracked 7,000 people for 20 years' highest vitamin E intake, 53% less Alzheimer's. Then there's the Brazil nut, the quiet overachiever just 2. Deliver your full day's selenium, a mineral that binds to mercury and escorts it out before it can rust your thoughts. Jim landed in my waiting room on a blustery October morning, 81 years young and still wearing the same leather flight jacket he'd earned in the Korean War. He flew crop dusters into his 70s, knew every checkpoint from here to the Mississippi by heart. Lately, he'd stare at his old logbooks and draw blanks on routes he'd flown 1,000 times. "Doc," he said, tapping the jacket's faded wings, "I can't remember if Checkpoint Charlie was north or south of the river anymore. My grandson wants to hear the stories, and I'm letting him down." His hands shook not from age, but from the fear of losing the sky he'd spent a lifetime navigating. We started with breakfast 1 ounce of mixed nuts every morning, measured in the little cup his wife used for flour. 14 walnut halves, a dozen almonds, 2 Brazil nuts, and a scattering of dried wild blueberries because the anthocyanins in berries team up with the nuts like wingmen. 6 weeks later, Jim strode in without the jacket, said it was too warm, and before I could ask how the recall was going, he pulled a folded map from his pocket. It was a 1954 flight plan, creased and yellowed, every checkpoint circled in red ink. He traced the route with a steady finger. Voice steady as a Cessna on final approach. Charlie was north, just past the old cotton gin. Landed there once with a busted altimeter and a prayer. His grandson was waiting outside. Jim took him up in a friend's Piper that weekend and narrated the whole loop from memory. The kid recorded it on his phone, Jim's voice, clear as the day he earned those wings. Here's how to make nuts your daily co-pilot without a single crash landing. Buy raw or dry roasted, skip anything roasted in oil. Those added fats turn rancid fast and inflame what they're supposed to protect. Measure 1 ounce, about 23 almonds, 14 walnut halves, or a small child's handful if you're feeling poetic. Store them in the freezer. Cold locks in freshness for a year, and the chill keeps the oils from going bitter. Soak almonds overnight in a bowl of water with a pinch of salt. 8 hours softens the skin, neutralizes phytic acid, and makes the vitamin E more available. Drain, rinse, pat dry, and they're ready for tomorrow. Eat them mid-morning or right after lunch when blood sugar dips. The healthy fats keep you steady without the crash. If you're watching calories, remember 1 ounce is roughly 160–180 fun worth everyone when it's buying you gray matter. Jim still flies with his grandson every clear Saturday. He texts me photos from the cockpit. Always the same caption, checkpoints locked and loaded. That's what a handful of nuts can do, rebuild the map your mind drew decades ago. Tuck a baggie of mixed nuts in your purse or glove box, and let tomorrow's breakfast be your pre-flight checklist. And while you're savoring that crunch, imagine a berry so potent it can rewind your brain's calendar by 2.5 years. Number 3 is the one they call the brain berry for good reason. Number 3 is the one I keep in my freezer year-round. A pint of wild blueberries no bigger than a thimble, each one packed with more brain medicine than a shelf of supplements. Harvard followed 16,000 women for 20 years, asking about every berry they popped in their mouths. The ones who ate 2 servings a week, barely a handful, he's delayed cognitive aging by 2.5 years. A 70-year-old brain performed like 67, still sharp enough to balance the checkbook, remember birthdays, and beat the grandkids at gin rummy. I have that study folded in my purse because every time I reach for a carton at the store, I need the reminder that small habits cast long shadows. The secret is anthocyanins, deep purple pigments that slip across the blood-brain barrier like VIPs, peas at a private party. Once inside, they don't just stand guard. They roll up their sleeves and stimulate brand new neuron growth. Cincinnati researchers took seniors already struggling with word recall, gave them freeze-dried blueberry powder for 16 weeks, and watched word retrieval jump 33%. That's not maintenance, that's renovation. Dorothy was 76 when she shuffled into my office clutching a worn score pad from her duplicate bridge club. She'd been the undisputed champion for 15 years, could bid a grand slam in her sleep. Lately, she'd stare at her cards and forget whether hearts were trump. "I had to pass on a sure thing last week," she said, voice trembling. My partner looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I have. The club had started pairing her with beginners out of pity, and the sting of that kindness hurt worse than any loss. We started simple 1/2 cup of frozen wild blueberries every morning, thawed overnight in a bowl of steel-cut oats and a dollop of plain yogurt. Nothing fancy, no sugar, just the berries' natural sweetness and the creaminess of the oats to carry the anthocyanins where they needed to go. 3 months later, Dorothy burst through my door. No appointment. Eyes blazing, waving a tournament bracket. She'd gone undefeated, taken first place, and on the final hand bid, and made a small slam in spades that left the room speechless. Her partner filmed the last trick on a phone. Dorothy's voice rings clear. 7 spades. Partner. Let's show 'em how it's done. She still plays every Tuesday, and the beginners now beg to sit at her table. Here's how to make blueberries your daily brain fertilizer without turning breakfast into a science project. Choose wild frozen. They're smaller, darker, and carry twice the anthocyanins of the fat cultivated ones in the produce aisle. Flash freezing locks in the pigments the moment they're picked, so you're not losing potency to shipping or supermarket lights. Aim for 1/2 to 1 cup a day. More won't hurt, but the benefits plateau, and your grocery bill will notice. Let them thaw in the fridge overnight, or toss them frozen into oatmeal heat doesn't destroy anthocyanins the way it does vitamin C. Pair them with yogurt or a sprinkle of oats. The fats and fibers slow absorption, giving the pigments more time to cross into your brain. Wash only when you're ready to eat. Water on the skins speeds spoilage. Store the bag in the crisper drawer lined with a paper towel to wick away moisture. They'll keep a month without turning to mush. Dorothy still texts me score sheets, same shaky handwriting, but now with smiley faces in the margins. Last week she added, "Partner says I'm bidding like I'm 60 again. Tell the berries thank you. That's what happens when you feed your brain the color it was meant to wear." Tuck a bag of wild frozen blueberries in the freezer tonight, and let tomorrow's oatmeal be your quiet investment in the years ahead. And while those berries are working their magic, imagine a kitchen staple you probably drizzle on everything, except it's capable of sweeping toxic proteins from your brain while you sleep. Number 2 is the one that turns your salad into a cellular janitor. Number 2 is the golden thread that runs through every Mediterranean kitchen I've ever visited. The one bottle every nonagenarian swears by without knowing the science extra virgin olive oil. I'm holding a spoonful right now, see how it clings. Thick and green gold, catching the light like liquid sunlight. Temple University researchers gave mice engineered to develop Alzheimer's a daily dose for 6 months. The results still give me chills. 80% fewer tau tangles, those twisted proteins that strangle neurons, and 40% more synapses, the tiny junctions where thoughts are born. These weren't just protected brains, they were rebuilt ones, with new connections sprouting like spring grass after rain. The star player is oleocanthal, a polyphenol that announces itself with a peppery sting at the back of your throat. If your oil pours smooth and silent, it's been refined into neutrality, beautiful for frying potatoes, worthless for your brain. Real extra virgin carries that gentle burn because oleocanthal triggers autophagy, your cell's nightly housekeeping crew. While you sleep, it sweeps out the amyloid debris that would otherwise gum up the works. I've watched the process on PET scans brains that looked like tangled Christmas lights slowly untangling, synapse by synapse. Anthony was 80 when his daughter wheeled him into my office in the same apron he'd worn since opening his trattoria in 1962. The apron was spotless now. He hadn't cooked in months. "I can't remember my own marinara," he said, voice cracking like old parchment. 70 years of muscle memory. And I stood at the stove staring at garlic like it was Martian. His mother's recipe, handed down on a yellowed index card, was the heartbeat of Sunday dinners for 4 generations. His granddaughter had asked him to teach her, and he'd burned the onions twice, then forgotten the basil altogether. The shame sat heavier than any sauce. We started with ritual 1 measured shot of extra virgin olive oil every morning, swallowed neat like the elders in his village did, followed by a generous drizzle over lunch and dinner salads. Nothing cooked above 375 degrees. Heat would murder the oleocanthal before it reached his bloodstream. 10 weeks later, Anthony showed up unannounced, carrying a steaming pot and that same yellowed card now laminated against spills. He ladled his mother's sauce over fresh fettuccine, the air thick with San Marzano and oregano, and recited every step without glancing down brown the pork neck bones first, low and slow, then the tomatoes never canned, always from the garden or the good Italian import. His granddaughter filmed it. At the end, he kissed the wooden spoon and said, "Tell Doctor, hope the burn is back in my throat and the memory is back in my hands." Here's how to turn your olive oil into nightly brain detox without wasting a drop. First, read the label like a detective. Extra virgin must be the first words, followed by a harvest date no older than 18 months. Look for dark glass or tin. Clear plastic lets light oxidize the polyphenols into uselessness. Taste it real. EVOO should pinch the throat within 10 seconds. If it doesn't, return it. Use it raw whenever possible. A tablespoon in the morning. Mix with a little lemon if the burn is too bold. Drizzled over steamed vegetables. Blended into hummus or whisked into vinaigrette. For cooking, keep the stove under 375 degrees. Sauté gently. Never deep fry. Aim for 3 to 4 tablespoons daily. That's the Mediterranean sweet spot where inflammation drops and synapses multiply. Store the bottle in a cool cupboard away from the stove. Heat is the enemy second only to light. Anthony's restaurant is closed now, but every Sunday his kitchen fills with grandchildren elbow-deep in flour, learning to roll pasta by hand while the sauce simmers. He texts me photos of the pot, always the same caption: Nonna's recipe, Nonno's memory. That's what happens when you let oleocanthal do the sweeping your brain can't manage alone. Measure out tomorrow's shot tonight, and let the peppery promise remind you that cleanup is happening while you sleep. And now, my friend, we've reached the pinnacle, the one food that doesn't just protect or repair, but literally tells your brain to grow brand new neurons, like you're 25 again. Number 1 is waiting, and it looks nothing like you'd expect. And now we've arrived at number 1, the food that still feels like a letter from the future every time I hold it in my hands. Lion's mane mushroom. It looks like a shaggy white pom-pom, or maybe a hedgehog that lost its way. But inside those soft fronds are 2 compounds, hericenones and erinacines, that do something no drug has managed safely. They tell your brain to grow brand new neurons, not repair, not protect, grow. They switch on nerve growth factor, the protein your brain used in abundance when you were learning to walk, talk, and ride a bike. After 60, NGF production usually fades to a whisper, but lion's mane turns the volume back up. A 2022 double-blind trial in the Journal of Medicinal Food gave adults 65 and older a daily dose for 12 weeks. Memory, focus, word recall all climbed. When they stopped, the gains slipped away. That's not coincidence, that's proof. Beatrice was 84 when her daughter carried in a dusty piano bench and set it in the middle of my office like an altar. Beatrice had taught piano for 60 years, could play anything from Chopin to Cole Porter by ear. Lately, her fingers hovered over the keys and produced silence. I tried Für Elise last week, she said, eyes welling, and couldn't remember past the first 4 notes. My students used to beg for encores. Now I can't even give them a scale. Arthritis wasn't the problem. Her hands moved fine. It was the wiring upstairs, the pathways that once lit up like a Broadway marquee now flickering out. We started with 2 rituals, 3 evenings a week. Thick slices of fresh lion's mane seared in extra virgin olive oil with a whisper of garlic, served alongside whatever vegetables were in season. And every morning and night, a 500 milligram capsule of fruiting body extract. Nothing else changed, no new meds, no brain games, just the mushroom and consistency. 3 months later, Beatrice returned without the bench. She sat at the little upright in my waiting room, lifted the fallboard, and let the opening chords of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata spill out slow, deliberate, every crescendo and diminuendo exactly as written. When she reached the final arpeggio, the receptionist was crying. The mailman had stopped in the doorway, and Beatrice's neurologist, who happened to be dropping off records, stood frozen with tears on his cheeks. I haven't heard her play like that since her recital in '78, he whispered. Beatrice looked up, smiled, and said, "Tell Dr. Hope the Hedgehog works." Here's how to invite lion's mane into your life without turning your kitchen into a laboratory. If you can find fresh, usually at farmers markets or specialty grocers, treat it like the delicacy it is. Slice it into half-inch steaks. Brush lightly with that peppery extra virgin olive oil we just talked about. Sprinkle with sea salt and a clove of minced garlic, and sear 5 to 6 minutes per side in a medium-hot pan. The edges turn golden, the center stays tender, and the flavor lands somewhere between lobster and scallop meaty. Oceanic, utterly satisfying. Serve it over greens or alongside roasted roots. The olive oil carries the harissa straight to your bloodstream. 1 large mushroom feeds 2. So share the miracle. If fresh is out of reach, supplements are reliable. Look for capsules labeled fruiting body only. 500 milligrams, taken morning and night with a sip of water or that morning shot of olive oil. Avoid anything with mycelium on grain. It's cheaper filler with a fraction of the active compounds. For a gentler introduction, steep 1 teaspoon of dried lion's mane in hot water and 10 minutes strain. Sip, and let the earthy steam open your sinuses while the NGF opens your mind. Store everything cool and dry. Humidity is the only enemy these compounds fear. Beatrice still teaches 3 students a week now, all grandchildren of former pupils. She sends me short video scales, then sonatas, then her own improvisations that weave in bits of jazz she learned in the '50s. The latest clip ends with her holding up a lion's mane steak on a fork and winking dinner and a recital best of both worlds. Pick up a mushroom or a bottle this week, and let the quiet regrowth begin. Your brain has been waiting for permission to rebuild. Lion's mane is the green light. We've walked through 8 foods that cool inflammation, restore recall, and yes, grow new neurons. Tomorrow morning, choose 1 egg, 1 square of chocolate, 1 handful of nuts, 1 splash of oil, 1 bite of mushroom. Start there. Your mind is still yours. You're just learning how to feed it right. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 8 are you trying first? And what memory do you want back? Drop it in the comments, age, location, the whole story. I read every one, and I answer. Your best years aren't behind you. They're on tomorrow's plate. I'm back in my little office now. The late afternoon light slanting through the blinds and landing on the framed photo I keep right here on the desk. That's Margaret, 81, last month, arm around her grandson, both of them grinning over a half-finished crossword. She still walks her terrier every morning, still calls out the clues to the dog as if he might solve them. And every September, she sends me a class picture from the school where she taught 3rd grade for 37 years. Every child's name written on the back in her neat teacher cursive. Margaret isn't a miracle. She's proof. She fed her brain the fuel it was begging for, and the years gave her back the sharpness she thought was gone forever. You're not just getting old. You're undernourished in ways nobody warned you about. But today, you're carrying 8 grocery store keys that unlock the door you thought was closing. 1 egg at breakfast to ferry acetylcholine across the barrier. 1 square of dark chocolate in the afternoon to widen the blood highways. A handful of nuts for more gray matter. A drizzle of peppery olive oil to sweep the night's debris. And lion's mane fresh or in a capsule to wake the neuron nursery that's been asleep since youth. These aren't exotic remedies. They're Tuesday dinner, Wednesday snack, Thursday salad. They stop the inflammation, restore the recall, and yes, grow brand new brain cells while you sleep. If you're over 60, start tonight. Soft boil 1 egg. Break off 1 square of 70% chocolate. Measure 1 ounce of mixed nuts. Pour 1 measured spoonful of extra virgin olive oil. Choose one, any one, and let it be the first brick in the bridge back to the mind you remember. Your memories are still yours. They're just waiting for the right nourishment to light the path home. Your best years aren't behind you. They're in the fridge, the pantry, the next aisle over at the market. They're in the small, quiet choices you make before the sun goes down tonight. If something in Margaret's smile or Beatrice's Moonlight Sonata touched you, tap that like button so another senior finds this video before another sunset. Then scroll down and tell me 3 things how old you are today, where you're watching from, and which of these 8 foods you're putting on tomorrow's plate. I read every single comment, and I answer with a tip that fits your kitchen and your life. Share this with the friend who keeps misplacing her keys or the brother who can't remember the punchline anymore. Hope travels fastest when we pass it along. I'm Dr. Hope, and I'll be right here next week with another handful of practical ways to keep the years kind. Until then, feed your brain, guard your heart, and remember, hope heals.